Hello, everyone. My name is Bethany Graham, and I'm a manager with IAPA's Global Professional Development Department. Thank you for attending today's IAPA Education Partner webcast, How Attractions of All Sizes Can Deliver Engaging Customer Experiences by Leveraging Ticket Data, presented by Omnico. Before we begin our presentation, let me take a few moments and explain today's webcast format. During our broadcast, attendees will be able to view and listen to the presentation, but will be muted. Attendees will be able to submit questions to the presenters. At the end of the presentation, we will get to as many questions as we can. For future access to this insightful presentation, a streaming copy of this webcast will be available in approximately 7 to 10 business days on iapa.org. It's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Norman Miglietta. Norman is the head of global marketing with the Omnico Group, and he will be moderating the conversation and assisting with Q&A. Let's get started. Norman, I'll turn it over to you to introduce today's speakers and to kick off the presentation.
Thank you so much, Bethany. All right, welcome everybody to our webinar this afternoon. And let me just get started here. So a little bit about this, the webinar we're going to conduct today. It's important to give a little background on Omnico to help explain this. Again, want to emphasize this is not a sales pitch. This is we're explaining what we've learned in our history from working with very large organizations and the key learnings that small and mid-sized destination parks and attractions can leverage from that to be able to compete like the big parks, right? So the key thing is, it's sharing cost-effective ways that the mid-sized parks, family entertainment centers, zoos, water parks, museums, attractions, it's be able to leverage the customer ticketing data to deliver a more engaging experience, just like the larger parks, right? So our experience in this goes back well over 25 years. We've got a market-leading technology, but one of the key things, it's all about the customer journey. And every customer journey begins with the ticketing stage, right? So if you can get some key learnings at that moment of engagement, that will help set the stage for everything that you do, whether you have an all-in-one solution or whether you're starting with the ticketing data to be able to leverage that audience. So with that in mind, I want to introduce our key panelists here. So Scott Smith joins us. He is associate professor at the University of South Carolina's College of Hospitality, Retail, and Sports Management. Scott grew up in the Orlando area, so he's seen Orlando grow from its infancy. Well, okay, Scott, maybe not the infancy, but as it's grown throughout the years. And during his career, he went to University of Central Florida and began his professional career with Marriott Hotels, worked in different divisions throughout the United States. And right now, he currently holds his position at the University of South Carolina with the College of Hospitality and Retail Sports Management as an assistant professor. And his primary areas of research are pricing and revenue management in the hospitality industry. So, and he also provides some consulting work on that. So we'll be able to give us some really good insights from that. And then from Omnico, we have Jason Ashwell, our Chief Product Officer. Jason's been with Omnico for 10 years now, and he serves as product director, really helped to lead the whole product planning and lifecycle management for the company's global offering. All right, so he is a strong customer advocate and really has a good industry thought leader. And that's why I always like to feature Jason on these webcasts, because he can really provide thinking from the customer's point of view for this. But he oversees our product portfolio, and he's had various marketing and sales positions throughout his career as well. And once again, I head up global marketing for Omnico. And my key thing is, it's be able to leverage permission-based customer data to deliver a really enhanced customer experience. So what are we going to talk about today? 5 key things. So we're going to talk about navigating the guest journey, walk you through a map of like the nirvana from a customer engagement standpoint. Then we'll talk about how ticketing data is changing, not just the transition from COVID, but to where we are now, but where it's going to the future, because there's some really exciting developments with that. And then what should we do with that data? Scott's got some really, insightful ideas on really what to do with the data. And then it's like, how do you use that data to drive customer spend and then be able to track guests throughout that journey in various different touch points? So if we look at the customer journey, okay, if you think about a destination, family is planning a trip, they go online, they book their tickets. It's great. They're walking through here, trying to make it as seamless as possible. Maybe a week before they arrive at the park, they get an email asking if they want to pre-book parking. Again, you're starting that engagement with them. You're trying to make it as seamless as possible for that customer to really get into the park faster, as pain-free as possible. And the more they pay up front, the less they're having to pay at the park. In theory, just as the perception of having to pay, it's already prepaid. So they're going through the journey. They get to the park, and they got their mobile app, simple QR scan, easy entry. Maybe they even have a fast lane to be able to get through, so they don't have to wait in the crowded lines or people buying tickets, because they already have everything. So off they go. They're enjoying everything, enjoying all the attractions at the park. Maybe there's some, different things as they start to get through the middle of their park. They start to get hungry and they see some lines up ahead. You know what? They've been looking forward to this trip. They don't want to wait in line to eat. So what do? They order ahead. They find out their lunch will be ready in 20 minutes. They've got an opportunity to take one more ride, and off they go. So they arrive at the restaurant, and do they want to eat there, or they want to take it to go? They get there, they decide to be seated, and they just show their code. They instantly get seated, and they have their meal, and off to the journey they go. And they start walking around the park again. And perhaps midway through, they get a nice push notification that, why not enjoy an ice cream and thanks to your loyalty, you get a free ice cream cone. It's like, fantastic. All they're thinking about is like, wow, we got a free ice cream cone. They're loving it. So they go to the voucher, show their kiosk, get their free ice cream. Perhaps towards the end of the day, it starts to rain. It often happens in places like Florida, maybe around 4 o'clock. It's like, oh, they're getting wet. It's like, well, maybe get a quick little coupon pops up to get a poncho or an umbrella. So I was like, perfect. There's a stand. They go there, they buy it. They're enjoying their park. As they leave, maybe they get a quick email the next day asking them how they enjoy their park. And, and are they interested in getting an annual pass? Are they, do they want to come back? Maybe even the next day, whatever it is. But all this begins with the ticketing and that experience. So with that in mind, I want to kick us off by talking about how ticketing data is changing, right? So as we talked about at the beginning, the first thing to do is you buy your ticket. We do an annual customer barometer study, and our last one showed that 61% of attraction vendors believe that technology needs to be more integrated into the overall attraction experience. So right away, you're getting buy-in from the customers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jason first to get his insights on this. And Scott, feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Norman. Hi, everyone. So, yes, as Norman said, I think the expectation is increasing, certainly around the interaction of technology. I think one of the really key things from the way that data is changing over the last 2 or 3 years, and I think it's becoming habitual, not just because of COVID. It's not just the kind of COVID scenario, and we're going to go back to how we used to, but is that first stage that Norman had on that journey. So from when you've bought your tickets through to when you register. So I was at a destination on last week where we were talking about how things have changed over the last 2 or 3 years. And they were talking about typically kind of 2 or 3 years pre-COVID, they were at a 60-40 split on walk-ups versus people who were buying ahead. So typically it was 60% buying ahead, 40% walk-ups. And they're now running at somewhere between 75 and 80% of walk-ups. So they'd obviously gone 100% during COVID, but they're still now tracking at around that 80%. So you think of that in kind of real world terms, there's 20% more of your guests who are visiting your parks or attractions, and you're getting all of that data now before they come that you weren't ever getting before. So to get 20% more data could be 2 weeks, up to a year in advance, obviously depending on the kind of location. That's giving you a lot more data that you can now start to look at and see what type of guests that you've got coming to your park. So you've got that period from when they've bought the tickets in advance through obviously to kind of when they come, where you've got all of those upsell opportunities. You can kind of gather more information around demographics, try and get more information, because obviously historically you're going to have limited amount of information you want to capture as part of that ticketing process, because you don't want dropouts the more demographic information you're capturing. But it's 20% more people who you can try and market, who you can try and get to download the app. If you've got waiting times, 20% more people who you can send offers to. So rather than 40% of those, we call them ghosts, who are kind of walking around who you know nothing about because they've just walked up and bought a ticket, you've got a lot more information on your guests who are visiting the park. So I think it's not just kind of because of COVID. I think habitually, because people have got used to it, actually they like that experience of knowing that they can come to the park, they haven't got to wait in a queue, they know they've got the capacity. So it's actually that kind of experience that they're after now, rather than just something that kind of happened for 2 years, unfortunately. I don't know your view, Scott.
Well, I want to start off by saying, a general message out there, in that there's never been a better time for, small or medium-sized attractions or family entertainment centers to compete against the big guys out there. In years past, what you've seen is, the big, the big 3 or 4 have had the resources to do kind of the market research and be the innovators out there. And the small and medium guys just kind of followed the leaders, so to speak. And so now, with everything else out there, I mean, the internet is the great leveler. And, we can talk across the board: sales, marketing, operations, supply chain, and all that. But we're talking specifically about, collecting data on tickets and your guests now. And so now, the insights that can be gathered now are what we call actionable. And so in the old days, if you wanted to look at consumer behavior in the parks or what they're doing, you kind of follow them around with a clipboard, or even worse, you ask them questions, which is spotty at best. And now all of a sudden you have this wonderful tool available that you can dice and break up, different types of customer demographics and find out what their behaviors are. And, in science, and I do a lot of research in science, and one of my favorite sayings out there is, when we observe something really interesting that is unexpected, my favorite thing to say is, isn't that interesting? And there's all kinds of insights that if you know how to collect it properly and analyze it, that can give you some insights that would have never been uncovered before in the past. And so, you have to go and use all these tools available to you to get some insights. And now all of a sudden you have actionable information, and you can nowadays, instead of kind of following the leader or doing what the larger parks are doing, see some trends or some things that you might have never considered before, and act upon them, early on, and really get the guest attention. And I think, that's what we're talking about today. That's what is a great equalizer or leveler. And so there are all kinds of tools out there, and there's also all kinds of market research firms that can help you break down what the information is saying. So I think that's the value of what we're seeing now today, especially with this seminar.
So if you're thinking about the data, like back in the day, ticketing was all about just managing capacity potentially. So now you're able to combine the capacity with the guest data, and really to be able to enable all that personalization, correct?
Yeah, I mean, in the old days, the ticket got you in the gate, and that was its sole purpose and function. And you typically didn't even collect the demographic data. And again, I can, remember the days of someone waiting at the gate with a clipboard and, asking questions, and it's not very effective, especially for guests who are wanting to get in the park and get on the ride. They don't want to stand there and answer questions. Someone with a clipboard, and even if you try to bribe them with, a free meal or whatever, you've got kids that are tugging it, mom and dad saying, let's go. And now you kind of bypass that. And in addition, you're observing, and you're not kind of collecting this information secondhand with someone's memory or someone who may think this or that, or this is truly, it is a tool that everyone should consider using.
Excellent. Well, with that, let me go on to our next one. So what should you do with that data? I was doing some research. I was looking at the McKinsey study on general data, and they made a comment here that, in an increasingly customer-centric world, the ability to capture and use customer insights to shape products, solutions, and the buying experience as a whole is critically important. Makes sense. The research tells us that organizations that leverage customer behavioral insights outperform their peers by 85% in both sales growth and more than 24% in gross margin. So customer data, it has to be seen as strategic, with this. So, and the key thing is really, how do you connect, the personalization at scale to be able to use the analytics? And it's all different sizes, whether it's working with a very large simulation or just even at the lower end. Scott, you mentioned that it empowers the smaller parks to be able to do it, that this is a key time more so than ever for these parks to be able to leverage that data and to be able to tailor everything to make it a real, customer data in both in real time, depending on their attributes, context, and their behaviors. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, sure. Yeah. The first thing, is, right out of the gate, you want to know who your customer is. You want to be able to categorize your customers into different, archetypes or, demographics, not only demographics, but, one of the things that we do a lot of research on are generational differences. And I don't think it's a shock to anybody out here that say that, baby boomers have different, behavior patterns, and Gen X's and Gen Y's and spending patterns. And so, the first and foremost thing that I would always say is, okay, well, do you know who your customer is? And Jason mentioned, we have this category out there, to ghost, where you've got customers that are spending money, but you don't know anything about them or what their behavior is or what their preferences are. So that's the first and foremost thing, is to be able to get a clear picture of who your guests are. And then the next step, like I say, is you start to drill down, is to look at different behaviors. And we've talked about this, that different nationalities have very different behaviors about what their priorities are and how they spend their money. For certain nationalities, believe it or not, they don't go right to the rides. They go right to the stores, because the merchandise and the souvenirs are what they are really interested in. Other nationalities it's all about food and beverage, and they are going to focus in on your food and beverage outlets and your offerings. And so just the awareness of who your customer is probably the greatest value. And then again, you can start looking at, okay, well, what do we do with this information, or how do we market them? And again, if you know who your customer is coming in, then you can provide them with incentives upon arrival to get them to act and spend more money.
Yeah, so just to, I guess, add on to that. So I think one of the key things that we do with some of our customers, we create personas. So you kind of, as you talked about, Scott, you don't want to, when you've got that data, you don't want to start sending ticketing discounts to people who are never going to, those kind of teenagers who just want to buy tickets, never buy any food, who are going to kind of come to the park. Or it might be you've got a family who are on a budget, so you might want to send them some kind of rewards. So it's trying to make sure that you're personalizing enough that you're not mass marketing to all of those guests that you've got the information on, but also you don't want to go to that extreme where you end up kind of killing yourself with all of these micro segments that you've got 100 different kind of people or personas. So it's trying to I think, get that balance between making it so that anything that you follow up with is relevant to them, so that they feel engaged with you, and they're getting the right kind of experience, but also so that it's not kind of on that mass level. And I think the key really now is that if you look at the big operators, historically, they'd have teams of data scientists who'd be trawling through all their different systems. They'd go into the ticketing system and then into the point of sale data and hotel data if they've got hotels attached. And that team of people would be trying to stitch all of that data together and try and kind of work out those different segments. And I think the key now is that actually there's tools out there that can kind of help you build all of those different segments. And then actually, as you said, which is the really important thing, Scott, is then how do you make all of those, that kind of personalization so that it's actionable? There's no point in getting all of this data and then getting swamped with it. It's how do you make it so that it's relevant, that it's timely, and then obviously you kind of can do something with it. And I think we'll talk about it a bit more as we go through, but it's making sure that that actually you can do it in either real time. If somebody's come to the park for the day, you're kind of that type of attraction where you've got somebody there for the day. You need to be able to do it while they're on park. So it's kind of making sure you've done all the pre stuff that we talked about, then all the stuff while they're on park or at your destination, and then obviously kind of post. But it's making sure that you don't send an offer to them that they've kind of only come for the morning and they've disappeared to another park, because then you've lost that ability to get any more kind of increased spend. So I think the key is build those personas or segments, and then make sure that there's something actionable you can do with them, and use the kind of tools that help you do that kind of work to make sure you get the most out of it.
So you guys are talking about, basically you're segmenting the guests into those persona driven to help, build relationships with them. So I like to call it mass personalization. If you can segment them into key buckets, whether it be by nationality, generation, and with those. So, but it even goes beyond that. If you're collecting that data as people are going through the park, you could even, if you can map that up to staffing. So if all of a sudden everybody's moving through the parks and they're like towards the back of the park, you can then move your staff towards different areas of the park, right? Do you think, talk to me a little bit about that you guys think how that can be leveraged?
Yeah, so I think the more data you're gathering, and obviously that's this is the whole theme. Some of this is how you have, so you haven't got to have all those people trying to stitch together all that data. The more that you can actually have the kind of nirvana almost, where you've got that guest information across all those different touch points, obviously then you can track them as they're moving around. So I think, again, we'll talk more about it as we go through, but if they've downloaded your app as part of that visit, so because they want to see what the ride times are, or they want to use the kind of cashless wallet, if you can then send them a coupon or something, and you can then track where they're using that, so you know that you might have more people in a certain park. You could even use kitchen data, so you know how busy certain kitchens are in certain places. Mm-hmm. You can use all of that data that you're gathering then to try and push people into different kind of locations. And I think because there's been heavy technology adoption over the last couple of years, those different channels give you those tools to kind of get that data, so that you can actually then look at how your traffic and again, kind of how you're moving people around the park. Certainly, again, one of the challenges that we've come across more in the UK is more so, I guess, like spring break in North America, Easter holidays, for example. Everybody could really track. Everybody knew that they were all going to come for probably 1 or 2 weekends over the Easter break. Now, actually, that's spread out over 3 or 4 weeks because the schools have spread out that break longer. So again, the more you know up front on what types of tickets you sold and the volume, that helps with your staffing levels. So you're not staffing to peak if you know that probably you're only going to be at 70% because the capacity is reduced over that longer period.
Okay. We're saving Q&A for the end. However, there's an interesting question that popped up here. How do you continue engagement in a water park setting where guests could be separated from their mobile device and or paper ticket, whether it's in a locker or stored in a bag in a lounger?
So I
I'll
think,
jump in there, and
go on,
I
Scott.
know that I'm associated with a resort, and they have the wristbands, the RFID wristbands, and so even Volcano Bay. I've not been there at Universal, but I hear great things about how you get this basically what is a waterproof watch band with an RFID tracker on it, and invest in that, and then that you can basically accomplish the same thing there. That's quite an investment, but again, if you find this information that valuable, then it really is worth the investment. Does that answer your question, Jonathan? I'm going to
And
assume it does, yeah.
yeah, well, we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
we can come back to that as well.
I probably
Yeah.
should just add. So I think, yeah, kind of the tapu at Volcano Bay, which was originally done for the whole, fast pass. You could register and then come back when your ride was free. That's quite a heavy in technology investment in those devices, even though you've given them back. But I think even if you can have a simple RFID or some kind of wearable, and the key is to then link it back to that folio that you've created as a guest when you first register for your ticket. So if you can link that RFID band back to the ticket, so you can gain access, back to a cashless wallet if you can do that, back to your meal plan if you've bought an entitlement. So it's trying to have that one piece of media, which could be a wristband, could be a phone if you've got it out of the locker and it's on an app, is trying to tie all of those different touch points and engagements back to that single wristband. As you say, yeah, people aren't going to ever walk around with a phone in
Yeah.
a walk a lot of time. It's going to be stuck away. So
Not for long, they won't. Yeah.
So, all right. Let me just jump back and move on to our next question here. Oops. Make sure I get the right one. Okay. So, how do you use the data to drive customer spend? You got the people in the park, they prepaid for their tickets, but now, give me some other examples. We touched upon a couple other ones, but what do you think are the best ways to leverage this?
So I can go and then Scott dive in. So,
Sure.
So again, once you've got that information from the ticket up front, so again, they might have kind of downloaded the app, or they might have their kind of phone. I think it's making sure that, again, Scott touched on this really early on, that all the data you're gathering is actionable. So there are things like tools like digital coupons. So it might be depending on the persona. So if somebody's, again, you've got a family because somebody's bought 2 adult tickets, 2 child tickets. It might be that you want to send them a digital coupon for one of the food outlets, so that that they may not kind of buy that. Might be they do buy it and you don't send it to them, you send it to a different persona. But things like digital coupons, so they've got them in advance. Again, tools like if you can link promotions back to that wristband. So in a water park, if you can just swipe your wristband and then it will use any of the personalized promotions that you've got in your basket, even down to simple things like season pass holders get 20% off in retail. So I think the key is that once you know how you've got all of that, all those personas and all that data, is that you make sure that you're not reducing your profit in the channels they're going to shop in. It's making sure that you're trying to get them to cross shop against all those different touch points. So don't cannibalize your kind of data or your profit in those touch points. Make sure they're using different things. The other thing that you can do, based on that new technology, is if you don't want lots of queues, you want people to use things like Order Ahead app, is you can actually drive those different types of promotional activity by different touch points. So use the app and get 20% off, or use a kiosk and get a certain amount of money, or go to this location because it's quiet and you want to drive traffic around the park. So I think they're the kind of key things, is actually making sure that you're thinking about how you want to use all those types of promotional offers, so that you're actually increasing your average transaction value or kind of profit. It could be a mix of those different things, so that you're using those different tools. I think one of the other things, and it's becoming more and more important is the use of machine learning and AI. Certainly on those parks or destinations where somebody's only coming for the day, if your data scientists go away and do all of that, validation of who's done what, where they've shopped, and they've gone, the person's gone, you're only then trying to offer them a discount to come back potentially. So it's making sure that you're using the relevant tools for the relevant audience to try and make sure that they're increasing their spend.
So if you're a small or mid-size attraction and you're maybe not getting the international visitors, but you got a lot of local ones, so there you could incentivize them to come back maybe midweek when it's less crowded because they're there locally, right?
Yeah, so I think, and that's the use cases, isn't it? Or it might be,
Yeah.
Somebody's coming from a long way away because they've booked, so you send them an offer to use a hotel partner. So you're trying to kind of increase, making sure that depending on the demographic and kind of location information you've gathered up front, that you're sending something which is really relevant to them. And that's the whole thing about personalization, is send me something that I think is relevant rather than something that's just as you said, mass personalization.
Scott, you made an interesting comment earlier. We're talking about different nationalities that they might go to the shopping first or to eat first, what have you. So I guess in this case, you would try to make sure you don't want to, as Jason said, you don't want to cannibalize that audience if they're going to go shopping anyway. Maybe not incentivize them to buy anything, but it could be for them to eat. So do you see a lot of that? Obviously, a lot of opportunities in that space.
Right, and I think, Jason pointed out about cannibalizing is you don't want to send a coupon to somebody who you're just going to assume is going to, make that purchase anyways. You want to target people who may not make that purchase. And I just pull out maybe, families who are on a budget, wouldn't want to go to the premium restaurant, but if you send them a coupon to get them to consider it, then all of a sudden you've done basically an upsell, and that you're gonna get a higher amount of revenue for it. So I wouldn't send if you have a signature restaurant or your best restaurant out there, I probably wouldn't send it out to people who you just assume are gonna probably want to enjoy that experience anyways. You're going to want to target people who would not consider it. The other thing, and it's interesting, we're talking about getting, short-term revenue gains, which is I absolutely encourage you. But there's also long-term, and let me paint a scenario for you where technology can be used to improve guest service, which in the end, basically buys you a customer for life. And that, my wife has a lot of dietary restrictions, and it's always a hassle or a problem, wherever we go, that, we have to be very specific when telling people, here's what she can and can't have. How wonderful would it be if you're able to kind of record this information ahead of time, set up a customer profile, maybe even make an advanced meal purchase based on the dietary restrictions. And so you show up to the predetermined restaurant and swipe your card, and they say, oh yeah, your meal is ready here, it's prepared the way that you specified. And boy, you want to talk about winning over the guests or getting a loyal customer. Those type of small experiences like that, where you're able to really overwhelm them with great guest service, buys their loyalty over time. And so, and again, I agree. We can talk about trying to get increased revenue on the day of through coupons and so forth. But there's also a guest or customer service aspect of it that you should leverage as much as possible. And there are a lot of special needs guests out there, and if you could become kind of that park that's known for I don't know, maybe handling guests with disabilities or special dietary restrictions or whatever, that's going to get people's attention, and people are going to notice. And so here's another way to kind of leverage that information technology, and it can all be managed through, you know, these information systems there. And so, and again, I always, you know, I my job, you know, as a professor is to teach revenue management, and we talk about how, you know, you can improve the bottom line the day of, but I also want people to also look at, hey, that you're trying to win a customer for life, or a loyal customer, and this is, you know, you talk about profitability. If you can get the short-term gain from that one day, but if they keep coming back, you know, 2 or 3 times a year, or even annually, just because of the customer service you provide, that's going to really affect your bottom line in the future.
It's interesting the way these can both play out working together, because you're through a coupon in the in-park experience, you're enhancing the guest. You're driving revenue to instant revenue, increasing the customer experience. Maybe it's the kids that are happier and it's like they walk away with a smile on their face. But to your point, building that long-term one, that next engagement, it's wow, that's very impactful, and that is the power of data, what we're talking about here. So I'm going to use that as then a segue to our final question here, and it's talking about how then to leverage. How do you track guests using other touch points in the park? So this goes beyond a little bit beyond ticketing, mind you, but it really is, you know, everything starts with ticketing, but then if you start to add on other ways to surround yourself to be able to leverage the data throughout the whole park. Jason, you want to take a lead on this one?
Yes, I think I think it was a few months ago, I was reading something. It was about SeaWorld's results. Actually, they announced their 9 months, and they were talking about their per capita, because everybody at the moment is seeing an increase in per capita spend. And I think theirs was something like 6% for admissions, and then they had 18% in park spend that had increased. And I suspect, I don't know exactly the SeaWorld's, but if you look, they probably don't know where that 18% has come from, because they're not tracking through from when the guest bought the ticket through to actually, is it that that guest has bought something in retail? Is it they've bought in F&B? I suspect some of it's probably inflation based. Some of it might be because people are spending more because they've got all that kind of pent up COVID demand. But I think unless you're joining all of those different channels with that guest, we kind of always come back to, it's the first touch point for the guest is always when they buy the ticket. That's where you get the information. So if you're not having that seamless or frictionless journey across all those different touch points, I think it's very difficult to actually find out where you're getting that extra spend by not joining all those different touch points together. So I think the more they're joined together, and again, that's I think the key with smaller operators versus the large one, was where you haven't got all of these people who are joining it together. It's using the tools that actually help you stitch that complete customer journey. So again, I talk about the Nirvana. Wouldn't it be absolutely ideal if your Candyland journey that you did, you know, that kind of twisting, that you knew exactly where they've done, or it might be if they've downloaded the app, you know, from their Wi-Fi triangulation, their hotspots, you know, actually how did they flow around the park? So although we talk about, you know, typical touch points like order ahead and kiosk, making sure that all those different channels with ticketing are all joined up, in the future it'll be even more things like you know, beacons was talked about a lot, but it's never taken off. But you certainly can kind of find out where people's location is and how they flowed around the park. And then ultimately on those different touch points, it might be, you know, they're just about to leave. You might want to send them something for another event, or you might want to say, you've bought a day pass, why don't you upgrade to a season pass? Or, you know, those kind of things where you're trying to surprise and delight people by using all those different touch points that they've hit as they've gone around the location, to try and, again, it just improve that experience.
I guess you know, there might be opportunities also to add a little gamification, if you would, by using some QR codes throughout the park. Very simple. Everybody has their phone, so that could be a simple first step to be able to capture that data as people go through the park. So
yeah, the somebody that I was talking to last week, they exactly using that gamification. It was around Easter egg trails, and they kind of had
Yeah.
some gamification. You had to walk around the kind of dinosaurs and try and find the eggs in this kind of certain park. So they were using gamification. I mean, it was more of an interaction with the kids to try and help them
Yeah.
navigate the trail. But again, you're all the time, you can expand that to all the different areas to find out. And again, you can use that for things like queuing. If you know that certain areas of the park are busy, you can drive those guests by using that kind of gamification to, you might say, pop up. The next thing is go to this part of the park to go and find this certain dinosaur or whatever, so that you're moving the traffic around based on that gamification. So there's so many different tools that you can use to try and increase that experience.
Scott, what do you see as some of the trends in this area that you've been researching and you see on the horizon?
Yeah, when it comes to parks, what we've seen in our lifetime is basically a transition from kind of that mass spectator. You go in and you watch a show and you're amazed by, I don't know, the dolphins and the whales, and we've gone beyond that now, where people just don't want to watch. They want to be in the tank swimming with the dolphins and the whales. You're no longer a spectator. And if your business is based upon, the guest being a spectator, you're woefully behind. And so the interaction or the personalization is the key. And again, this goes back to what I said at the beginning, is that if you're going to compete against, the big guys, one of the ways that you can do that is to provide that individualized, personalized experience. And you can't do that without these data tools. And now, and I'll tell you, one of the, when I managed hotels many years ago, we had a doorman, and his name was Rodney, and Rodney made way more money than me because he raked in the tips. And one of the tricks he had is, when the car would pull in to check in, he would go and he would open the door and say, "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We're so glad, that you're here at the resort." And the guests would look at each other like, did we tell him our name? And he had little tricks to figure out, like he would go and look at their luggage tags right away and see if their names were on it, or he would print out, the arrivals list for the day and have this in his head, so that he could pleasantly surprise the guests by using their names and, almost, you call them tricks, for personalizing, their arrival. And that just set, the expectation of, wow, this is going to be a great experience here. They know our names and we didn't even introduce ourselves. And so if you kind of keep with that in mind, and how you can use, the technology to personalize an experience, there are all kinds of tricks that you can have involved, and I think of almost like, a big screen TV at the entrance that says, "Welcome, Scott Smith." Well, how do they know, that I'm coming through? Well, if you figure it out real quick with the technology, and proximity sensors will say, okay, you're here or there, whatever. And then the other thing is, Jason mentioned, is the gamification now, that there are a lot of guests that go for the atmosphere of the park and not necessarily for the rides or one particular ride. And so there are people that love kind of a scavenger hunt, trivia, things that don't require $1 million investments in capital, like a new roller coaster or whatever. But if you can do some type of scavenger hunt, again, with the kids or even the adults, you've added basically more value to your park without having to spend 30-40 million dollars on a new roller coaster or a new ride. And so this is a great way to kind of bundle all these services together, between the ticketing, the push marketing, and also kind of the personalization in the gamification. And when you start to consider how many ways in which you can use this, it just makes sense to invest in this type of technology. Does that answer your question there? I know it kind of went,
Yeah.
but yeah, the
No,
personalization. If you can leverage the information systems to really personalize, to get to use people to use the guest names or welcomes or any of that, that just adds value, and that's something that a small park or a medium-sized park can do that even maybe the big parks cannot do, because how personalized can you get it with 70 or 80,000 people in your park, as opposed to say a smaller number. And so that's the competitive advantage of being small or medium sized, and you really need to consider that, because that's what people are looking for now. They don't just want to be kind of that spectator anymore. They want that individualized attention.
fantastic. Question came up just in regards to earlier we were talking about the personas. Is it customers, do you have to wait till you grab all that data, or is there some data they can append to user data as it pops in? So example, if we know their ages 30 to 40, could you have some pre-populated information, if this then that? And if so, where would somebody be able to get that information? Scott, I'll aim that at you, kind of as you're teaching some of this potentially.
Well, maybe Jason might be better with that, but I think that if you're asking for making it actionable, you've got to have a well-trained staff that knows how to do this. And again, time is of the essence. If you're getting real-time information, you don't have the, or you can, but you're losing an opportunity if you sit back in the next couple of days and say, let's analyze the data from Tuesday. No, you should be, anticipating and putting in real-time action steps. And so that's why it's helpful if you can analyze it, after the fact, but it's even more helpful if you can, actionable information.
Okay. Keyword, actionable.
Yeah. I think the other key, because I think I touched on it briefly, is that you can't start capturing all of that information up front. Nobody's ever going to, you'll have your dropouts online for tell me your date of birth and all, phone number. Once you've gone past four things, then you're probably your dropouts will just massively increase. So it's making sure that you capture enough that you can do more with it before they arrive. And it's almost the so what. It's like, if you want all that information, if you want me to give you all of my date of birth, where I live, all of that kind of stuff, what do I get for it? And it either has to be financially rewarding. I know that if I do this, I'm going to get something back. Or as Scott's talked about loads, it has to be something from an experience perspective, so that actually if I give you this information, I'm going to get something back. And it might be that I get invited to a special event because of my demographic. So I think that's the first thing. There has to be a so what, and it has to be, you have to capture it at the right time. If you try and capture it, the one I always think of when I think would be really good is if you could do, I've stood in front of queues, at 9 o'clock when the park opens, and there's a massive queue of people all ready to go in. They're stood at the gate. They're getting ready to sprint to the ride that they want to go on, because they know that's a perfect time. I've stood in queues for 3/4 of an hour before, because I know I want to get there early.
Yeah.
Do something with them. Do it, gamification. The more information you can capture when they're just stood around, or they're in a queue when waiting to get on the ride because they're in the middle of summer. So it's making sure that there's something in it for them, that it's the right time to capture that information, because that's when you've got them as a captive audience. And then once you've got that information, you talked about the kind of workflow or triggers. That's again one of the things is, if you can build that workflow in that says, if somebody's bought this ticket type and they've bought this type of thing in food and beverage, then they probably are going to do this. So it's trying to build those workflow or those different rules
that mean that actually that based on those different scenarios in real time, they're going to get something back. And again, that's making sure that you use those tools rather than those data scientists, because it's all right sending something post, and you want to do that because you want to try and obviously keep engaging them once they've left, but it's making sure that you do it. If certainly there's lots of day visitors, that you do it while they're there. But it's
Okay.
all about, I think it's the so what, it's what's in it for me.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So we have another question about data, and if I have the full question here, it looks like it's, if on a busy day system gets down, what is the backup, and will the data be lost or stored? I guess it depends on the system, or what are
So
your
kind of,
thoughts,
I guess,
Jason?
that depends on different systems and how they store data. I can only speak from ours, so certainly we store all of that data. If you lose your network, then you lose some things to look up things dynamically. But certainly from our perspective, we store all that data, just because if somebody sent you, I don't know, a digital coupon, for example, you don't want to get to the park and then you find out actually you can't use it because there's nothing there. So there's a mix of, you don't want to store everything down at the park, because then you end up buying massive servers and you spend a fortune on storage. But it's that mix of, if you've offered something to somebody, there's almost this expectation that they can get that, and if you don't have that available, then again you haven't surprised and delighted them, you've annoyed them and kind of given them a rubbish experience. So there's a balance, I think, is the kind of answer.
Okay.
I would agree with that. Don't go cheap. There's nothing more frustrating, as Jason pointed out, that you have a certain expectation and you get there and they can't deliver on it. You've gone, from delighting a customer to almost creating an enemy, or a hostile environment. So you definitely don't want to go cheap on information systems. That's
Okay. Hold on. Looking at one more question. Is there any, Scott, here, I guess this question is aimed at you. Is there any specific data set which you believe will hold the most hidden treasures for smaller attractions?
You know what? I tell you what, if you can get generational data, we are seeing more and more of very distinct behavior in generations. And so, and I would buy some books on generational behavior as well. I mean, I frequently get a lot of requests from different, enterprises to come and talk about the different generations. It happens to work out really well because I sit on the border of two generations right there in the middle, and then I teach. I've taught, the two up and coming generations as well. So I have some unique insights, and I will say, totally different cats, and really what they value, in their experiences and their behavior, is, a Gen X will absolutely look like another Gen X, and a Gen Y will absolutely look like another Gen Y, and that's kind of a 1,000-foot view of things. If you start just by categorizing people in generations, that is going to yield so much data. In things that you wouldn't even think of. And I'll use me and my son, for example. I mean, I love plastic straws, and I use them all the time. And to him, that's akin to being an eco-terrorist or whatever. And so, if you can start to understand the generational differences, especially for the generations coming up, because those are your future customers, that is really the starting off point. And then you can start to subdivide, into further categories. But if you are kind of trying to do a one size fits all, it is not gonna work that way. So that would be where I would start.
Okay. We have another question coming in. Is there anything the panel feels that big parts are not doing where smaller parts could capitalize on?
Jason, you want to go first, or because I'm?
No, I know this one's really passionate. You Scott, really.
I'm afraid if you don't go first, I'll run out the time on this. So go ahead. I'll let you.
Yeah, so I think the thing that the smaller parks have is the ability to be more agile, so you can make decisions much quicker. It's not this massive corporation where you're having to sign everything off. So I think there's a lot more agility. I think it's much easier to innovate as well when you're a smaller park. You haven't got to go through that whole kind of procurement process. We certainly, again, we kind of come back to COVID, but things like order ahead was a massive thing. Lots of small parks were going to kind of, order ahead companies and switching it on in a matter of days. So they wanted the revenue, knew that they couldn't do, the stuff where you had big queues because people weren't prepared to stand in a queue to go and order food. So I think that's really the key, is that ability to kind of be more agile, more innovative, and I think probably be closer to your guests. Know who your demographics and your guests are, because you're not having to trawl through the millions of all these kind of different different people. Think of the big parks; they have so many different. As Scott said, you've got people from the Far East who are interested in spending thousands of dollars on retail shopping. If you've got people from the UK, they've probably invested loads more up front. They might have bought their meal plan. So the offers that you have, it's very difficult to start to understand your guest and drive down. And obviously they have, tens of, if not hundreds of people trying to understand their guests, and they do a good job of doing it. But I think if you're smaller, you can get to those real sweet spots sooner because you kind of have less data to draw through and you're much closer.
Excellent. So I apologize, gentlemen, we are out of time. And
you answered it, Scott, you see. I can't.
I thought you had right.
But we can absolutely continue this conversation too, to be able to, if you have questions, feel free to send them to us. We will be happy to follow up with anybody. So by all means, you can reach us on omnico.com. We'll answer the questions. We'll get with Scott to be able to do that. So thank you again. Bethany, I guess I will turn it over to you at the very last.
All right, thank you everyone. As a reminder, this presentation will be up within 7 business days on IAPA.org. And thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We will see everyone at our next IAPA Education Partner webcast. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye. Thank you.